So today's lesson 4, and we're going to look at assignment 1, which is posted in the assignment section. And it'll be due in 2 weeks on the Thursday at 5 o'clock. So you have 13 days to do it, which is plenty of time. You have to build 3 pages, which I don't think is an onerous requirement in 13 days. So we can take a look at the requirements, we'll go through it, and I can answer any questions or give any clarification if there's anything that isn't absolutely clear. So your assignment's worth 15% of your grade. As I said, it's due on the 13th at 5 o'clock. All you need to do is submit 2 things. I'll take out the file upload requirement. I know people were saying, I know I had to upload a file in Lab 1. I'll remove that. All I want are 2 things. GitHub link to the live site, which is what most of you gave me for Lab 1 as well. Okay? Make sure your repository is private because it's got to contain your database credentials. So the easy way to do this is make your repository private and invite me, there's my GitHub username, as a collaborator. Okay. In order to do this, it's fairly simple. Once you create a repository, I'll just open up the repository from last week's class. So when you make your repository, make sure that it's private. And by default, only your account will have access to it. So to change that, you go into settings. Over here on the left, the second item in this sub-navigation is Collaborators. It'll ask you to confirm your password. And then you just put in my GitHub username, my little avatar pops up. You click add and GitHub will email me the link. Okay. Now, I still need the link in your submission because many of you have cryptic GitHub usernames. So yes, GitHub will invite me, but I don't necessarily know whose repository belongs to which student account. So make sure you put the URL in your submission on D2L as well, please. So that will give me access and nobody but me to your repository. And then just give me the link again to your pages on the server so I can run your application in the browser. You have to do your own work on this, okay? It's not a pair or group assignment. So everybody has to build their own. If you don't give me your own assignment, I will not give you a grade. I will give you one of these instead. We're in week 4. This is my second one of the semester already for somebody giving me work that clearly they didn't do. I hope that's my last one of the semester. Okay. So this comes with a couple of warnings. You're allowed to use the files that I publish to GitHub as a reference. You can't download them, change the words, and submit them back to me as your own project, okay? I know what my own code looks like, so if you give me my work with the words some of the terms modified, I'm going to know. And I'm not going to give you grades for files I largely created. Okay? So that there is a guide, that there is a reference, they're not there as a starter template for the project. You actually have to create all the files on your own. Okay? And lastly, I've built a sample application and there's screenshots. I'll walk you through it. I'll show you what I'm looking for. You can't build the same application. I want you to build something different. I don't care what it is, but it can't be the same website that I've created as a sample. So pick something that you want to build, preferably some little 3-page website that you might actually have use for. Okay, I've given you a few suggestions or examples. You can build the site on any subject that interests you or you think would be valuable to have a little application in your pocket you could use. So I've given you a few examples here. Actually, I should probably take this one out. You can't build an online music tracker because that's what we're doing in class together. So you have to do something different from that. So you'll need 2 tables in your database. You'll need a form. You'll need to check the inputs on the form. We'll look at a couple different ways of doing that today, and you'll need to use both methods in the assignment. If the form inputs are good, you'll need PHP code that will insert the form contents to your database. And then you'll need a third page that's very similar to what you did for Lab 1. You need a page that displays an HTML table that shows all the contents from that table in your database. And you'll add some comments to your code. So that's the high level. So you need 2 tables, and I will explain why. Actually, maybe I'll just pull up the sample. Here's my sample of what I would be looking for. So your first page should look something like this. It has to be a form. You have to have more than at least one input on it. You have to have at least 3 or 4 inputs on it. And one of those inputs should be a drop-down list. Last week, one of the pages we built, we wrote a query where we fetched data from the database and entered it into a drop-down list. So this is what you need the second table for. You need one table that will be used just for the purposes of populating your drop-down list. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to your form, leave your form blank, and click your Save or Submit button. And I should be prevented from submitting a blank form. If I fill out the form properly, and then I hit save, I get a message saying my record was saved. So that's our second page is the save page. And then the third page, this is basically just like your Lab 1. This shows a grid of all of the records saved from the form. So you can see I was able to add a new record at the bottom. So you cannot build a player roster site. This is for illustration only. Build something else where I can create data. Your site checks that the data is valid. If it is, it saves it. And then I can see a list of everything. Okay, so I have 2 tables in my database for this. Obviously, I have the players table. And then I have a positions table, which is only used for that little drop-down list. So those 4 positions, I don't have any pages for those. I manually just inserted those 4 position records into that table so that it could show up in my drop-down list. So this is a fairly simple application. You don't have to do any CSS on it, and you have 2 weeks to do it. That's lots of time. So one table for storing the form inputs and one table that fills your drop-down list. One form where you have an input that matches every column in your database. And you must include at least one drop-down. You'll need to validate the inputs with HTML5. So you notice when I click the save button, when my form was blank, it got a little red outline around my 3 empty boxes. So we'll look at doing that today. It's really simple. You probably did it in your HTML class already. Then you'll build your second page, which is a save page. On that page, you also need to use PHP to validate the inputs. It's not enough to just validate them on the form. You also have to validate them on the server, and we'll look at why today. So you need validation in 2 places. And if the data is valid, you'll save it to the database, and then you'll build your third page that shows your list of data in a grid of rows and columns. Deploy to AWS and have your code running on GitHub. So there's a few requirements for GitHub. I've shown you how to add me as a collaborator. For this assignment, you need to get into the habit of committing to GitHub regularly. So there's 2 marks for using GitHub properly. If you only make 1 commit to GitHub, you only get 1 of the marks. Why do you suppose it's a good idea that we get in the habit of committing our code to GitHub regularly? Magnus? That's a great answer. Absolutely. To do it in steps. Yep, that's one good reason. Yep. Yep. So, right. It's your offsite backup, right? Your computer gets stolen, someone spills coffee on it and fries your hard drive, you get a virus. Every time, if we're regularly backing our code up to GitHub, we're not going to lose stuff if our machine gets damaged. We get another machine, we pull our code down, we keep working. So to get full marks, you should make 4 commits and name each one descriptively. So for the reasons you're talking about, you don't want those to be called commit 1, commit 2, because then we don't really know what the difference between each version is. So we should put a description of what work we did in that commit. You also should create a Readme file. What's the purpose of the Readme file in a Git repository? Why do we have it? Anybody ever created one? Braden? Right, so the Readme typically describes the project, and oftentimes if we're giving users documentation of how to use the code in there, we list that in the Readme file. The Readme file also should include a link to the web page. So we can say, here's the code, I built it in Intro to Web Programming, here's the link to my website so you can try it. And this is useful as well when you're out job hunting. One of the most important things employers ask for nowadays for developers is they want to see your GitHub projects. So by having the README files, they can look at your different projects, see what kinds of things you're doing, and then also click on links if you have those site applications running in a browser. It's easy for somebody to access them. So it's a way of helping show your work. So I've taken the screenshots of the little sample application I built. So you can see the dynamic dropdown, the save page, and then the list when it's done. So as I said, pick something else. I don't really care what it is. Your tables can be anything. They just can't be exactly the same as somebody else's in the class. And there's the markdown, the breakdown of the marks. So most of the marks are for saving data, reading data, and validating, both on the forum as well as on the server, that we get good inputs. A couple marks for comments, version control. And lastly, I'll give up to 2 bonus marks for any independent learning you do with PHP. So if you add any additional functionality that we haven't talked about in class that's PHP related, so not JavaScript or CSS or anything else, we're doing additional work with PHP to add more functionality to your project, I'll give you 1 or 2 bonus marks depending on how extensive that is. Okay? Don't get carried away. Don't build a 20-page web application for this. If you have an idea for a 20-page web application you want to build, that's fine. Do the first part of it, and then you can build on the rest of it later. So you don't need more than 2 tables, and you don't need more than 3 pages. Does anybody have any questions about what I'm looking for or what you need to do? No? For assignment 2, we will probably expand on this assignment. So make sure you finish this one, because if you don't finish it now, you're going to have to finish it later. Okay. I'd also recommend start sooner rather than later, because A, you may have other bigger projects coming up in other classes. This one isn't that big. You can probably do it fairly quickly. And if you start soon and you run into problems, it gives you lots of time to email me or book an appointment for office hours and come and get help. If you do it at the last minute, it's going to be more difficult to get help when you need it. Okay. All right, I'm going to open up our project from last week. Now my code isn't going to run because I've taken my password out before I pushed it to Git. Thank you, Leo. Now I have to find my password to put it back in. Bear with me for just a second. So I'm going to start up my local web server again. So I can get my application running. And I need to make sure I connect to the VPN because I'm using my AWS database. I'm not going to have access to it unless I'm on the VPN. So I'll connect to OpenVPN. Start Apache. So here was where we kind of left off last week. 2 weeks ago, we built our form, our save page. So we want to look at validating input. So this is one of the things you're going to have to do in the assignment. So if I just save right now, lets me just save an artist. And if I go and look at my list, I've now created a blank record in here. So theoretically, somebody could come to our website and fill up our database with a whole bunch of either empty records or they could put garbage information in here. And this is a common problem, especially because we're building web applications. Often they're public. We have no access control. Anybody can come and fill out, for example, our registration form and put in whatever they want. So we want to validate in two places. We should validate right here in the form, but we also need to validate on the server. So we'll make some changes. I really just need these 2 pages for now. We'll need our artist form and our save page. So we can use HTML5 to add some validation here. And this should prevent the user from even being able to submit the form if it's not complete or doesn't follow all the rules we set out. But we also want to add validation here. Why would we want to add validation here before we save as well if we have validation on our form that would block them from even submitting? Okay, because people could post data to this page without going through our form. How could they do that? There's a few different ways. You're right, they can, and yes, that is the reason. But how would somebody be able to send data to our save page without first going to our form? Okay, yep, that's one thing we could do is basically disable that. How else could we do it? Okay, so let's say I did this, right? I could just make a page. You don't have to follow me. I could make a form and set my action equal to I could just make my own form make it the same as the form I see. I can inspect the name of the controls on Leo's domain, and then I could just create my own form, and where will it go? To his save page. So if he's only checking on the form, but not checking on the save page, I can still submit data. Or even more easily, I could use a tool. We'll probably use this later in the course. We can use an HTTP client tool. So this will allows us to make HTTP requests to any URL, and we don't need a form. It lets us simulate a form. So typically we use this. If we have time later in the semester, we'll use it, or we'll use it after co-op when we start working with APIs. So we could do things to try to get in the back door of people's applications with this kind of tool. Just loading really slowly. So I could make a post request. I'll just pick that out. And I could say the name is, and I can send any values I want. And if I submit this request, it's actually going to run. So for a whole host of reasons, validating in our form is not enough. There's all kinds of ways users could send data to us without going through our form. So we need validation in two places. It's most efficient to put it in our form. It's easiest to code. And that way the form doesn't even bother submitting to the server if it isn't valid. So that's ideal. But because there are these other ways into our save page, we need to add validation here as well. So what validations do you think we should add to this form? I would suggest there are probably 3 things we want to check for. And if we just look at it in the browser. Okay, so name should be required. What else should we do with it? How's that going to work? Why won't that work? Right, our database table, we set this field up to hold an integer. So if we try and submit this value, it's either going to crash or just record that as a 0. So what would we do in the form? How would we add those 2 validations? If we were going to use, we could use HTML5. So we should add something here to make sure the user can't submit a form unless they've put a value in there. Right? So we can add the required attribute. So we've put a star here in the label because that's an indicator to our user that that field's required. So we need the required attribute. And what should we do inside the year founded input to ensure the user can't just type any kind of value in there? We'll add another attribute. How can we ensure that if they put something in, it's numeric? Right? And what do we want here? We want to set type equals number. So this will prevent somebody from typing alpha characters or any special characters. It's only going to allow numbers. So let's go and refresh our form. So notice my browser now gives me up and down arrows here. If I click save, name is now required, so my form doesn't even submit. So that's good. Anything else we need to add here? Right, so what attribute should we also add to our year founded so I can't do this? We should add something else. So we can set a min, and what would be an appropriate min in this case? Okay, that sounds reasonable. Now we probably don't want to set a max. Okay. Sure. So there isn't a particular right or wrong. In other applications, the min's going to be 0. If this is a shopping cart page, and we're putting in a quantity of how many we want to buy, so the min's probably going to be 1. So what that range is depends on the context. So we could put a max in. I guess we could put in a max of, well, we could put it in as 2020. The problem is next January, we're then going to have to go and update the code. That's a good question. So could we get the current year and in PHP set that as the max? Sure, we could. So if we put in PHP script, so there's a function in PHP to give us the current date, but then we need to parse just the year out of it. I have to think for a second because off the top of my head, I don't remember how to do it. So we'll go and check. Internet is our friend. We'll need to get the current date first. I don't think there's a function to just give us the year. So we might actually have to put this code at the top and store it in the variable and then print out the variable down here. We may need a few lines of code. Okay, this may work. Echo, date. Well, we'll try that. And don't type the word format here. That's just a code prompt. We'll see what that gives us. I can do 2020. Yep, so that seems to work, right? At 2021, it puts red around it and says that's an invalid value. So this way it's dynamic. So next January 1st, we don't have to update the code on this page. It will automatically set the new max as 2021. And I think if we view the source, I'll just shrink this down so we can try and see both at once. So if we view the source, yeah, it sets our max as 2020, which is good. We might also want to use this function in the footer. Eventually, we'll build a header and footer for our application so we can have a copyright and it will always show the current year. And we don't have to update that each calendar year. That's a really good suggestion, Jillian. Thank you. So we don't really need validation around our website. It's optional. We could try this. I actually haven't used this before. There is a type equals URL. We can try that and see how it works. So if they enter a value, it has to follow kind of, it uses the under the hood, it uses a regular expression for a URL. So we can try that and see. If I put in ABC, okay, if I put in ABC dot. Right, so this requires the full path. So we'll keep this in, but it isn't just the domain. It has to include the protocol of HTTP or HTTPS in order to work. So there's our form validation in HTML5. This is the most efficient way to validate. Obviously, we just add some simple HTML code, and it prevents our form from ever even getting sent to the server, which is good because it takes bandwidth every time a form is submitted to the server and a new request is made. So there's no point processing those form submissions if we know we can check in HTML that our user hasn't completed the form properly. Let's just stop them in the front end in the browser and make them add all the proper inputs we want. So what we're going to need to do on our save page, we'll take a break in a minute. I think we'll do it when we come back. On the save page, we're basically going to need to write PHP equivalents of each of these validation rules. We need to make sure that we get a value for name. We'll want to make sure that year founded is a number between 1,000 and the current year. We'll see if we can find a regular expression to validate the website. We can probably at least check that it starts with HTTP at the very least, if we have a value there. And only if all of those rules have been followed do we want to connect to the database and save. If any of those rules, one or more of them, have been violated, we want to print a descriptive message to the user telling them what they've done wrong, so they know what things they need to go and fix. So in the browser, they'll probably never see those messages, but if we use a tool like this, or we build our own form to post to it, our validation rules are still going to execute. Okay, I will push what we've done so far up to the Git repository. And I'll take the actually, I'm not going to push because it's going to mean taking out all of my passwords again. So we'll take a pause here.